Hi, this is the Holistic Missile Show, and I'm Patricia Wall, and here with me is Bruce Bonner from the Living Science Wellness Center. Bruce is the nutritionist extraordinaire, and we're going to have some fun tonight. We're going to talk about cravings and compulsive eating. So I'm going to talk about the behavioral parts of that, the emotion parts of that, and Bruce is going to tell us about the nutrition parts of that, because Bruce says there are actual nutritional reasons why we would crave chocolate. So I think I crave chocolate. If I have a craving, I used to crave chocolate to the point where I couldn't have it in the house. If it was there, I'd eat it, even if it was like baking chocolate. And I don't do that anymore. Thank you.
That's pretty good.
It is. And I've done a lot of stuff that has changed my entire interaction with food. So I really get it when people have issues, with eating. So for me now, if I want chocolate, I'm happy with just a little bit to have the taste, and then I'm good.
That's a great point to be at.
So, but if I am craving it, is there a nutritional reason for that?
Well, you see all the information on chocolate, and I think it's the pros and cons, and everyone likes to, in the nutrition world, likes to lambaste everything, of course. I think that there are some interesting biochemical research into biochemistry, and that'll get into things, from magnesium, and some people will have magnesium deficiency, so craving it, and it helps to calm the body. Theobromine and caffeine are chemicals that are in chocolate, in caffeine in smaller degrees and theobromine in higher degrees, and they help stimulate the nervous system, make you feel good. There's like precursors. They help the serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter. That's our feel-good neurotransmitter. So there's research into how chocolate affects our body chemistry, and how then, if the further out of balance one would be from being, I guess, calm, overstressed, overworked, then I think you get a better therapeutic hit, to be honest. And so I think that it's the more balanced you are, and especially in the work that you do, Trish, I think in everything, and I have clients as they work on themselves on, spiritual, emotional, and physical basis, they don't need it as much. They get the hit, they feel good, and it actually might as well use nature's pharmacy. Well, I mean, it's there. And
Yeah.
I think that's the balance. And there's also a substance called phenylethylalamine, or P as in Paul, Edward, Adam, like PEA. And there's quite a bit of research on that, and how it does have this. That's part of their questioning the love, why chocolate is the love food, and how it does help mood and increase, the desire for like sex and so forth, and that's why it was used since antiquity. So it's interesting molecules. I think as the nutritional science goes on, they discover more and more things. I mean, we know a fraction of what nature provides. We think we know everything, but I think they keep discovering more and more. So I think there is some biochemical basis for sure.
So here's the thing. Now, because I don't crave it anymore, what I actually find is if I have chocolate, if I have a cup of hot chocolate, and I'll get the, the dark, unsweetened stuff that I like, the hot chocolate, or if I have like chocolate as a dessert, it makes me sleepy. As opposed to, and it's got caffeine, right? So you would think it would wake me up.
So, well, the caffeine piece is, there's only a tiny percent, from what I've researched, like that 10% caffeine within I think like 100 grams of chocolate. I'm not an expert on chocolate by any stretch. There's books and books and books written on it, but compared to, say, coffee, I think coffee has like 5 to 8 times more caffeine, per square inch, quote unquote, like, the amount. So I think that's one of the reasons why, and perhaps you're getting more of the other biochemical aspects that you need, I think, and that's or the magnesium, right? There's like little pieces that everyone would require, and I think that's why it works differently in people. And some people can have a tiny square and feel amazing and get the hit, quote unquote, and other people need like the whole bar before they would even, get the net effect.
Cool. So one of the things I write about is reasons that people crave for energy reasons and for emotional reasons is, they'll crave fats for comfort. They'll crave sugar as an anesthetic for emotion.
That's
They'll
right.
crave crunchy foods because they have suppressed aggression. They have suppressed anger. And that, of course, potato chips like the perfect food because you've got your
Absolutely.
fats for comfort, you got your crunch, got your crunch for your suppressed aggression, you got the simple carbs that I
Yeah.
think translate to sugars.
Yeah.
So you got your
Salt.
anesthetic, and
Yeah.
salt is for holding on.
Mm.
And that's interesting. We think of
Fuel.
salt as a preservative. Well, in emotion terms, like for energy terms, salt is because there's something you want to hold on to that you don't want to let go of.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah. And so potato chips, it couldn't be better if you get
They're
all of the
magic.
things. It's like all of the things.
That's it. That's awesome. And that's great. I'm learning from you. Like that stuff I haven't studied. I think that's really it does make sense. And I
Yeah,
wonder even then the endogenous flavors, sourness, salt, sweet, bitter. There must then also be an associated emotion toward those as well as what. And I think biochemistry, and if the body's missing, is overdoing it, we tend to overdo salt and sweet in our society and miss some of the bitter, and then people start craving, the pickles or something. Their body
yeah,
endogenously needs the help, but is there an emotional piece to it as well for each flavor?
absolutely. There's emotion, there's emotional associations with all of it. Okay, so if you think what sour would be, would actually be a withdrawal. If you think kind of like what your mouth would do if you put something
Right.
sour in there, it's sort of a pucker. Uh, there's things that happen with your tongue with energy, and they literally, it mimics your threat reactions. And so the sourness is going to make a pull back, and that's part of a freeze and hide reaction.
Oh,
So it's
interesting.
a withdrawal from resources. It's a feeling that you can't succeed. And that doesn't mean if you eat a pickle you think you can't succeed. It means if you're craving them and you feel compulsive about it and you want it, you'd crawl over glass to get it, and we have
Right.
lots of those kinds of cravings. That means that you feel trapped in a situation where you cannot see a way to succeed that satisfies your personal values.
Huh. And so
Okay.
sweet,
Sweet is an anesthetic. Like you're looking to
of
suppress
course.
emotion. You don't want to feel. And that's interesting because that's also why people will often smoke, because smoking raises your blood sugar. And so again, anesthetic for emotion, right? The other one you said is bitter, and I haven't looked at bitter, so hold on, I'll check and see what comes to me for that. Oh, bitter is for lies. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so we form beliefs, and our values are an expression of our beliefs, if you think. And we all get trained in our beliefs, and we don't ever pause and question them. So, for instance, you might believe honesty is the right thing. Lots of people believe honesty is the right thing. And yet there are lots of situations where it is kinder or more
Right.
strategic or just more realistic to perhaps choose how you express yourself. And so one of the stories I use is, what do you do if you're there with your friend who's getting married and she's in her pea green wedding dress and she says, all right, I'm ready to go up the aisle. How do I look?
Right.
And you might not think a pea green wedding dress is the thing. So you might want to say, you're just glowing. You're just glowing. This is great. Off you go. And avoid comment as opposed to saying, what were you thinking picking pea green for a wedding dress? It's not the moment. It's not the moment, to be
Right.
honest. So the problem is if you believe that honesty is right, if it's the right
Mm.
thing, then now you're in conflict. You have an internal conflict.
Right.
And that is where the bitter craving comes from. I didn't know that till tonight.
Huh. That's pretty cool.
It is. It is. So if you're feeling, it's not that you feel you have to speak an untruth. It's that you've been put in conflict with a belief that's actually invalid.
Right. So you head right over at the bar at the wedding and get a gin and tonic because the quinine will
right?
be like super bitter,
Right? See?
and suck on a
Is
lemon or something like that.
well, see? And you won't know that's why you're doing it.
Mm,
Uh, and it's not the fact that you spoke something that you didn't agree with. It's the fact that you're holding the belief that honest is right. That's the
right.
part that's causing the craving.
Mm.
That is an invalid belief.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Right.
So I'm
So
learning more about the cravings. That's awesome.
it is. It's awesome. Well, I love the part that we have these two pieces of it. We have the piece that's about what your body needs, and the piece that's about what your emotion needs, which is
Mhm.
also physical, right? And how they go together.
Right.
And I
I
always
know.
I always believe there's always both going on.
Yeah, I think if you're living in the physical form, of course, then yeah, there's a part of it. I think in a lot of the ancient cultures, there was a lot more emphasis, ancient Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic or Indian medicine. There's always a lot more emphasis on food and the inherent properties, the energetics, and so forth. I think in the Western culture, we tend to be missing, where we're very just calorie based. This amount of food, does it serve the purpose? Go and exercise, and somehow it all balances out without looking at the inherent cravings, but also the power. I mean, not only color of food and the inherent tastes. So in using that to balance things out. So if you do excess sweet in Chinese medicine, then you're going to overdo the pancreas meridian, or like they call it spleen pancreas meridian. So
And
that
that's
makes
all about
sense. And
it's all
that's all
about balance.
diabetes and all these sort of things that in the Western model. So they're all integrated, the models. It's just they're speaking a little different language, but it does show how if you just keep pounding in the sweet, you will create that diabetic tendency, or they call it dysinsulinemia. Your insulin's out of balance, your blood sugar is out of balance, and that can be going on for decades. However, it's now in younger ages. They don't call it adult onset diabetes, for example. They call it type 2 diabetes, because if you find it in teenagers, just the nature of our food supply and how much sugar we're consuming. So we tend to be overindulged on the sweet and overindulged on the salt, but not a lot on the sour and bitter side of things biochemically.
No, I
When you look at,
love
especially when you get into food processing.
yeah, I love Vietnamese food, and I know that one of the things they do is balance the flavors. That's one of the
Yeah,
things that the Vietnamese restaurants are very proud of, that they have all of these things in balance. And and I didn't realize it was a nutrition issue until tonight. So that's fun.
yeah, and you think the energetics of those foods, Trish, and how did they know that stuff? You think going back thousands and thousands of years, you say, I've got a little bit of curry paste and then I'm balancing it out with a bit of mint and I'm balancing it out. And how they cook and process. I think there's a lot of really great ingenuity that went into paying attention to the colors, the flavors, and how it balanced the energetics out. And I'm sure they also would figure out that emotional piece to some extent at some point too, right?
Right? And there's also intuition that they would
Of
know
course.
it would feel right to them or
Right.
feel not right. And that can come from an intuitive knowing. It can also come from if they ate something and kind of put them out of sorts, they would say that, well, that wasn't right.
Right. It's a good
And
point, and to be open to that.
yes, yes. Well, and they weren't as distracted, hey? Because, it's not like they were sitting around
Right.
watching TV or cruising the internet, so they have
True.
a, a lot less stimulation, I think, and a lot
Yeah.
more space to be aware of what they were feeling and what was going on in their body. And probably a lot less choices, because depending on where they lived, they had really a very limited menu.
Right.
So their capacity for becoming expert in what those small numbers of things were doing, it just had more space. If there's
Yeah.
6 things in your diet, then you're going to find out pretty quick what they're
Right.
doing, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting. Mother Nature gives a lot of the. If you look at the different regions in the world, you think of the temperate region or tropics. There always seems to be the foods with the right temperature, with the right healing, cooling properties, the right flavors that would help to offset a potential negative side. If you're always in around 35 degrees heat,
Yes.
Celsius, then there's a lot of cooling herbs, a lot of cooling fruits and veggies. And if you're in minus 35 in our climate, I'm always interested when you see a lot of people and they're eating the opposite of for their own climate. I know we are inside often, but you still have the effect of our climate. That's a curious piece too. So every culture could even find what's in their environment, and I'm sure over the eons find, like you said, what works best, what feels best to them. And I'm always amazed at people that are, say it's minus 35 outside, and they're craving soup and stew and something more heavy, and yet they're perhaps a raw foodist. And by nature, and raw foodists can work well. It's a very cleansing type diet. And then oftentimes I'll have a client come see me and they're like 3 years into that, but they're starting to imbalance their energy. They don't feel good, but then there's that dissonance between what they think will work and what they're intuitively craving.
Right.
And it can be just like, why not have, like, it doesn't have to be raw, but if you want to be vegetarian, like have a nice bowl of oatmeal, sprinkle some cinnamon in it, add like a teaspoon of coconut oil or something that would all be very warming and energetically very balancing. Then back to your point about more intuition and connection, it gives you what your body's craving. It doesn't mean you can't eat raw food. Why not be all inclusive? And then if it's in Ottawa here, it goes from minus 35 in the winter to plus 35. So it's very difficult on the body, and people don't appreciate that. And so if you're craving a lot of the raw food and salads and cleansing and so forth and everything that comes with spring and summer, go that route. But if it starts dipping into minus 35, it's not wrong to have warming soups, stews, etc. Because if your ancestors are from this continent in this climate, they definitely would not have been eating a ton of raw celery or raw salads. They wouldn't have even had it in the wintertime. And I'm not saying it's a blanket statement for everyone, but just honoring sort of your environment and just paying attention a little bit.
Well, and I noticed too, I see, the more common food allergies, one of the common food allergies is dairy, and yet there's this whole thought process, which is, we're adults, we shouldn't be drinking milk.
Right.
After you're weaned, what are you doing even drinking milk? And then there's things like citrus, which is a really common allergy. And it's, what if that's because your body doesn't know what to do with it because it's not part of your genetic heritage to eat citrus?
I think there's merit to it. I don't know, I haven't studied to that degree, but I think if you do honor nature and your body and the wisdom part and kind of set the ego left brain part aside, it totally makes sense to me.
Yep.
How that would work.
Now, we've got a whole slew of questions, and I have questions, but I want to get to because the audience is asking questions, so I want to give them.
I saw a carb craving question, so that's a biggie, right?
Oh, see? So Pat Milland is asking, what about spicy hot foods? Why would we crave those? So I'll tell you my part, and you can tell us if what your part is. So
Sure.
From my end, that's typically going to be about suppressed anger, which is different than suppressed aggression. I said the crunchy food is about suppressed aggression, and that's the, you have a desire to lash out, maybe to yell or whatever, and you've forbidden yourself that expression, and so you'll see crunch because you're literally grinding your teeth. You don't want to bite someone, so you'll bite on food instead. The fiery thing, if it's outside comfort, which means it makes you break out into a sweat, it kind of makes you wince with your tongue. Like if it's within your comfort zone, like you're not, it is flavorful spicy, that's actually neutral. If it's causing a reaction spicy, then it's you have an anger you haven't admitted.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's the...
So that's something where you're saying they know you're getting the XXX hot sauce, that it's going to basically cripple you for 24 hours or something, and just love that kind of effect, whereas some people wouldn't even want one drop, because you do see that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the discomfort is the suppressed anger. Basically you're giving yourself something else to be upset about. so that
Right.
you don't have to think about the thing that's actually bothering you, right? And that
Yeah.
you're actually suppressing. Now, from your end,
Mhm.
is there a specific reason
Well,
we crave?
well, if we excluded that, if you say hot, spicy, like you're talking about, just enough that it balances you out, it's not pushing you so far out of whack. I would say that some people who just tend to feel cold, contracted, cool, their body temperature tends a little bit more cool, then adding some extra spice warms them up constitutionally.
Ah,
That's common in Ayurvedic medicine. It's common in Chinese medicine, and I think even in Western herbs, or we're talking about Thai or Vietnamese cooking and so forth. There's always that balance. You want a little bit of the warmth, and you can push it, but you don't avoid the cool part. So
yes,
there's enough yang energy, that hot,
yes.
and then you've got just enough of the yin, and you can play around with it. And I think that from the hot spicy factor, I mean, I tend to run a little bit cool myself. And if I have some cinnamon and ginger or ginger tea, or add some extra warming spice, cardamom and so forth to my food, it balances me out and I feel better. And if you did have something that's a cooling food, like something like fruit, and if you took it right out of the fridge, for example, then you could add some spicy herbs to it and would neutralize, or kind of balance things out energetically.
Well, I knew a guy from India, and he would soak his fruit in ginger, ginger juice or ginger ale, and wow, was that delicious. It was just delicious. So that's the
Yeah.
adding the spice to the thing that's cool.
Yeah, I think in Western nutrition, that is a piece that is really, a lot of people could learn a lot more about spices and all the amazing energetic nutritional pieces to it. It really is an amazing area to study, and it's just not really looked at. We just kind of count calories, look at vitamins and minerals, but herbs are kind of, and spices are, and their net effect are left out of a lot of books. It's not really
We might have to do this.
talked about enough.
We might have to do this just to talk about the spice rack. Because I said to you the other
Yeah.
day, I was craving turmeric. I'm putting it on stuff like some people put salt on their food. I was putting this yellow all over everything, right? And you said, well, maybe I was Indian in a previous life. And I thought it was something my body needed. And
Yeah.
so, I asked you for a remedy, and it turned out it had turmeric in it. And I thought, oh, well, that's why
Right.
I'm craving it. Okay, that makes sense. And
Yeah.
pardon me. So it totally makes sense to me. I think that'd be a fun thing to do.
It's a good one. Shall we tackle the carb question? That was the one I think came up right off the bat.
Okay, so this
I'd be interested in hearing your side of it first.
Yeah. Okay. So this says, it's a question that somebody put in at the website. Like a lot of people, I crave carbs and sweets. I know it's not good for me, but it's hard to stop. What do you say about that? So the craving of carbs is a craving to not feel, which is also like craving a cigarette. It's a craving to not feel. And that means that there's something you're feeling that you're not comfortable feeling. So it could be that this is an emotion that's forbidden. So for a lot of people, anger is forbidden in their belief system or in their programming, and what they've been taught about behavior. It could be that you're sad. It could be that you're having trouble in your relationship, and there's resentment going on, and you just don't want to fight, kind of thing. So people will use carbs. So the people who are looking for lots of potatoes or looking for lots of rice, that carb urge is often an anesthetic. Like, I just don't want to know. I don't want to know what I'm feeling.
Wow.
What's it doing?
I totally believe it.
What's it doing?
I think, well, for me, the carb end of the spectrum is interesting. Biologically, humans are meant to get as much carbs into you, sugars, because your body has a different mechanism. The way the brain registers satiety or fullness with carbohydrates is different than fats and protein. So our ancestors would really do well, especially in our climate, the northern climate, in the late summer and fall, to be loading up on the berries that would be, going back a few years, of course, like berries that are wild. And then you have a lot of the root vegetables and you would be stuffing your face essentially with a lot of carbs to pack on 10, 20, 30 pounds for the winter.
Yep.
And carbohydrates, because the brain registers them differently than fats, you can eat a lot more, feel full temporarily, and swear off all carbs. And within an hour, hour and a half, it's like, oh, I'm still hungry. Like, where is the cookies almost?
Yep.
And because if you did that with fat and protein, if you just drank a cup of olive oil, even the thought of it actually makes people nauseous, and they would be full for like almost 18 to 20 hours. They'd be repulsed by food. Same if you took a steak that was 20-ounce steak and tried to eat the whole thing, you wouldn't get through it and you'd be repulsed. Same effect. But it's amazing how people would eat a whole huge plate of pasta, absolutely swear off it forever, and within an hour and a half be hungry. And so the body is designed to take any excess sugar that you don't burn off. So carbohydrate would be complex carbs. Everything becomes a sugar molecule. And then your body converts that. Anything unused can convert the sugar and stores it into fats. And that's what we're designed to do. And that's a great way to save you in times of famine.
Yes.
You become super efficient because fat provides more energy than sugar. And you'd want to live off your fat reserves for a couple weeks if you were really lean on food.
Yep.
The problem is in modern day, we're the same biochemically, and we have a lot of really inexpensive and processed and a ton of carbs, and are actually, the 4 food group pyramid over the last sort of 20, 30 years, it's been adjusted a bit, but actually, it's been a mandate from industry to actually promote. Even 10, 15 years ago, was like the bottom of the pyramid was all bagels and bread and pasta and everything. So I think that humans are carb cravers. We just have to be able to control it with the other food groups in order to balance your own chemistry out. And some people need more carbs than others. And that's really the thing, is no diet is right for everyone. So I actually don't think carbs are bad for you. I don't believe anything food-wise is bad necessarily, because it can balance you. Yeah, it can balance you out. Some people need a bit of carbohydrate. I personally need a little bit of carbohydrate at supper time for sure. Otherwise, I'm never full, the way my body chemistry works. And other people, if they had it, it would make them feel terrible, and they would start to crave multiple things. So I think to that point, we are carb cravers, and you want to find out, in addition to the emotional aspect, why your diet is out of balance, and why are you setting yourself up to crave and getting into that sugar craving roller coaster.
Yeah. I know for some people, and there's going to be people who are watching going, yeah, but you say you're full and you won't want something for however many hours, and lots of people, it doesn't matter if they're full, they still want to eat, and that's probably behavioral, I'm thinking.
I agree.
Versus nutritional. However, now you're saying, okay, well, wait a minute, because you could be craving something that you're not eating.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think that would be the perfect segue into fats, because fats are something that's been demonized in our society. Unfortunately, there's so much bad research out there and bad information, and a lot of it is industry sponsored, unfortunately. And everything is very, there's so many amazing researchers out there doing great work that's non-sponsored. I mean, the best book I've ever read was by the late Mary Enig, and she was a founding member of the Weston A. Price Society, and wrote this book, Know Your Fats, and it explains everything, and everyone could walk away, the layperson could read the book as well as the scientist and say, wow, I actually get something out of it, and goes through each fat and why we need it, and that we can't blanket statement things. I mean, it sifts through a lot of the processed fats, which we can talk a little bit about now. Well, the thing about fat is our brain actually needs it to shut the appetite down. So if you're continually eating a low-fat diet and or the wrong fats, a lot of processed fats, man-made, processed hydrogenated type oils, heat refined, they don't give the same feedback loop. So people are actually craving fats, and they're furnishing it with the wrong thing, usually not the right quality fats and not in the right amount. So you have 2 pieces to that puzzle, Trish.
Right.
It's pretty amazing.
So here's what I know. I know if I take the omega fatty acid stuff, if I take the pills, then I'm good. If I don't take the pills, then onion rings call to me.
That's interesting.
Right. And I think that's
so when you
if I'm having those omega fatty acids, then my body's good. And I like my coconut oil on my toast or whatever. So if I'm having, I guess, what would be the healthy fats, then I'm not looking for the other stuff. In fact, if I take enough of the omega fatty acids, then the onion rings are disgusting. But if I haven't had them, then the onion rings are just delightful.
Wow. And that's true. And so the omega fatty acids, the omega-3s and omega-6s, are the two types that the human body can't manufacture. We have to get them from the diet. What's happened is the omega-3s are quite depleted in our modern food chain supply. So that's why people are turning to, either flax-based or chia seed and foods like that, or deep water fish, or so you see fish and fish oil, and you're getting a very or krill oil is another. It's a shrimp-like creature, so you see krill oil on the market. And when you get good quality, well, I'll just preface that to say it's, you always use high quality companies, and they do the right job in manufacturing and preserving the integrity. And so just think, if you have 1 to 2 omegas, you're getting such a concentrated dose that you don't really need that much more, and your brain's saying thank you.
Oh yeah.
And it's stabilizing everything. And that would be the omega-3s. The other interesting thing about the processed oil industry is if you consume things like canola oil, soy oil, corn oil, cottonseed, all of the fats that are in our food supply, they're actually quite inexpensive to make, and they've also been overheat treated to preserve their longevity, because you can't eat a cookie made with an oil in it, say with soy oil. If the soy oil was not refined and deodorized and processed for shelf stability, then they would sit on the shelf, the cookie would go rancid, and you can tell rancid fats pretty quickly. So that's why the companies originally started out with those oils. It was all about shelf life and making something inexpensive so that everyone can afford it. But the research in the last 40, 50 years has been, oops, we went down the wrong path, because whether it was hydrogenated, which is another method of creating these fats so they can handle higher heat and stabilize them. That's what hydrogenation is. You're adding a hydrogen gas, changing the chemical structure of the oil, so now you can cook French fries in it 10 times and it would never go bad. If you just poured really proper freshly pressed soy oil and put it in, it would be toxic. You couldn't heat that to a high temperature. So the food industry was developing techniques in order to, it was all about cost savings and preservation and processing, but those oils actually disrupt our natural biochemistry. And so those omega-6, that's fats in general. And then what's happened is we've loaded our diet up with an excess of omega-6 fatty acids, which we can't make, we have to get from our diet. But that's created an estimated 40 to 1 up to 200 to 1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, and in nature it's always 3 or 4 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3. So you can see, if depending on what your diet is like, if you eat a lot of processed junky food, you're creating this bigger chasm between the level of omega-6 which you require versus 3, and that's where a lot of people run into issues. So having a teaspoon of some fish oil, adding more omega-3 sourced foods in, like flax, chia, etc., people are creating a better balance. I also suggest cutting out a lot of the processed foods. Then quickly your balance changes and your brain chemistry comes more online.
Yeah.
And then your cravings will diminish and accordingly. So that's really, in the fat world, that's what's happened in our society. And then we're demonizing things like saturated fat, because you mentioned coconut oil. All oils are actually beneficial. Saturated fats are super healthy, and your body actually manufactures them and uses them as their preferred fuel source for your organs, like the heart. Your cells use saturated fats. We just kind of went down the wrong path, assuming through a bit of propaganda that saturated fats, you eat a bit of butter and it's clogging your artery.
Yeah.
That's the furthest thing from the truth. That whole science has been debunked multiple times. I mean, the industry is still sticking with what's worked. Because if you preach something for 40 or 50 years, it's not dying in 2 years. It's going to take like a decade to kind of wind down. But there's a lot of physicians around the world are even saying, go back to butter, get away from margarine, etc. All that to say that there's the quality of the fats are necessary, and then the quantity, especially for what your body requires, and that will shut your cravings down. It's fats. that make that happen. So if you had a salad with an extra couple tablespoons of good olive oil with some balsamic, plus you had some carbs at your meal, say you had a baked potato and a chicken breast, you would be full.
Yeah.
If you go zero fat on the potato, no butter because that's evil, and then no fat on your salad, that's evil, and you get a bone dry potato and salad and you have your steak or chicken breast or something, I guarantee you're going to be hungry for something within an hour and a half to 2 hours, and you're usually then going for the carbs because your thought process is that the fats are not good for you, right? So you continue that cycle.
So there's a question here from Logan, and he says, I often find that after a meal that is mostly protein and vegetables, low starch, low carbs, that I crave sugar or fatty type desserts. Is that my body genuinely seeking a healthy balance, or is that, a subconscious excuse to eat cake?
I would say from my standpoint, I would obviously, as a client, I would look and make sure they are having the appropriate amount of fats on that salad or vegetables. So like a little bit of butter on the broccoli and so forth. And if that's the case for Logan, then I would increase his carbohydrate at his supper because he's going low carbohydrate, and say he's got half a cup of potato and he actually needs a cup or cup and a half.
Yeah.
And then he would feel amazing and he wouldn't crave the cake and the sweets, etc., and has excellent energy for the whole night. Then that's the right mixture for his body type, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and he's a big lad. He's 6'6", so he's got to have some fuel going on there, right? And
right, yeah, absolutely.
Right. We have another question from the website about chocolate, about the nutrition, and we already talked about that. So we're going to say, listen, the answers are already there. There you go. And we have this is one by email. I quit smoking over a year ago, but I still crave it every single day, and I'm tempted. I know if I give in, I'll be right back to smoking every day. So I have a battle with myself. Any tips on how to stop those cravings? So I have a piece for that. Do you have a piece for that?
I would say your piece would be more important. I would say that from a dietary perspective, you just want to make sure that you would have your balance of protein to carbohydrate to fat stabilized for your body type, and so that you feel good with food. And that would at least give you the biochemical basis, and then I think to deal with all the emotional stuff.
Yeah. So from my aspect, the craving for the cigarettes is the craving for an anesthetic for what you're feeling. You don't want to feel what you're feeling, and so I'd be looking for what is the feeling you're trying to avoid, and to help you deal with that. There's a free unlock you can get on the website that basically will help you release obsolete emotion. So if it's stuff that's hanging around from the past, it'll help you with that. Otherwise, there's lots of things there to help you figure out what's actually going on. Another one. So Patricia is going back to her question about the spicy foods. I have a family member who loves the spicy hot food and has lots of anger and hasn't learned how to deal with it. Yes. So if it's a family member and they're not interested in, hearing these comments, then what you have to look at is you have a pattern of having an angry family member. So this is how you can work on what's troubling you in your life. It means that in your childhood, there were people around you who were angry and didn't express it and didn't deal with it. And so your comfort zone becomes having angry people who won't deal with it. So that means you go do the unlock, and you go do the unlock about expecting anger around you, and that'll help release that. Another one from the website. In the past few years, my middle son is always hungry. He would eat all the time if I let him. He's put on weight and I'm getting concerned. I don't want to deprive him, but I'm worried for his health. Is this just a phase he's going through? I wish they'd put the age, because that would say a lot.
That would definitely say a lot, for sure.
It would say a lot.
Because if he's 12 and going through puberty, I
Yeah,
mean, that's the
he'll eat the
intermittent
sofa
growth
at that
phase.
point, you know.
That's right. And their body, the hormones are changed. I mean, there's so many things going on. The body is going through a massive growth phase that would be second only to a baby growing.
Right,
So a lot of mothers are always like, oh my God, my teenage son, say 12 to 14, a kid can go from 4'11" and 75 pounds, and in 2.5 years, he's 5'10", 170. It's like, how does that happen, right?
right.
So depending on from my perspective, depending on the quality of food and the balance, again, the son might just be fat deprived. Commonly you'd see it. I mean, I see moms come in and they're saying, well, my child like goes to the butter dish and just starts eating it.
Yep.
So, well, that's a pretty good sign that the child's missing some fats. They have really good instincts.
Right. And I know too, I have 3 sons, and what I saw in their growth spurts, they would basically eat you out of house and home, and then suddenly they would stop. And they'd stop eating, and it would probably be about 2 weeks, and just to the point where I was starting to think, like, there's a problem here. There's something seriously wrong. And so they'd stop eating for about 2 weeks, and then sort of overnight, nothing fit them. Their shorts, their pants are 2 inches too short.
Right.
Their shoes are two sizes too small. So what I saw was they would actually gain weight, and it's almost like they were stocking up. Then they'd stop
Right.
eating, and then they'd just poof, grow, just like that.
Right.
And then they'd be right back to shoveling in. They'd eat the cushions off the sofa if you weren't looking.
Right. And I think that really, to me, the fat thing, I mean, I work with a lot of teenagers. I work with a lot of elite athletes, especially in the teenage world. And it's so common, moms constantly giving their teenage son the 0% yogurt. And the guy looks in the fridge, can take down a liter at a time, and a half hour later come back. And I just say, well, get the full fat yogurt and see if he can eat that much. Usually he can't, and he's not hungry all the time. So it comes down to that fat piece too.
Yep. And so Pat asks, so it's okay to mix starch with protein?
I think so. And I think that certain body types do better by mixing protein with starch. I think that it's easier. I mean, there's so many books out there, and I know there's people who say just eat starch alone with veggies, and then some people protein and veg. If you don't have any digestive problems, heartburn, reflux, etc., then eating chicken with rice or quinoa and veggies is totally fine. If a person has a lot of digestive imbalances, then it's a good practice to go lighter on the mixing. And also the mixing of protein with starch works more easily if you're using the starchy vegetables, things like squash, sweet potato, parsnip, carrot, better than wheat pasta, concentrated grains. So there's a gradient of starch that does sit better for most people. So chicken Alfredo on pasta is usually troublesome for a lot of people. And if you have digestive problems, it's even more troublesome.
So this is interesting. Okay. Yeah, she says, yep. Okay. Now I know years ago, I had severe candidias, and I think I spent about 6 years living on chicken and rice because that was it. That was all I could eat.
Right.
And it cleared up, and I did energy work to get rid of the reactions, and but a lot of that was I'd been assessed. They gave me a list of food allergies that was, I think there was 35 things on it. And really,
sorry about that.
that was a long time ago. Really, the problem was the yeast. And I didn't learn about that till much later, that it was what I came to understand, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because this is just what I understood of it, is that the yeast was making pinholes in my digestive tract, and that would make the food particles go out where they weren't supposed to go and activate my immune system. Is that a correct description?
Yeah. So that would be candidiasis. That's where the yeast has morphed into a more pathogenic form and then can penetrate through the intestinal lining, causing havoc, exactly like you said, and a little bit more immune system dysfunction. And they get, in the pathogenic form, the yeast can start to cause you to crave more carbs, sugars, etc. So there are different cleanses out there. in the alternative medicine world, there's people that blame yeast for everything on the planet.
Yes.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's people that don't believe that that could possibly be something. I'd like to go right down the middle and say, yes, it can be. And you look at it at an individual basis for sure.
Absolutely.
And then your food allergies, you wouldn't have 35 things that you're problem with. You get to the source, heal the gut lining, the leaky gut, they call it leaky gut syndrome, and get your immune system stronger, then you can tolerate more foods.
Exactly.
And I think all of the work you talked about earlier, like unloading, old habits, emotional habits, that whole spectrum, to me is the icing on the cake. Putting all of that together can really change things around quite nicely.
Pat says, I like this guy. Me too, Pat. That's why he's here. So, my biggest question is, what's the right fat?
What's the right fat?
Mm-hmm. You said, the
all
good
of
quality
them.
Fats, the healthy fats, but like,
right. Like
is
quick fat 101.
Okay.
So you have your saturated fats.
Okay.
And that would be, now saturated fat is found in both plant and animal. People have a misinterpretation. They say, well, saturated fat, because the way the media has presented it is that saturated fat is animal fat, that's evil.
Oh.
But it's not, because you mentioned coconut oil, palm oil contains saturated fat.
I didn't know that.
So, and they have different types of saturated fats. So in coconut oil, you'll see something where they'll say medium chain triglyceride. Triglyceride is the scientific name for fats.
Okay.
And medium chain, all that means is get any of your viewers to think of things. Just picture like a length of a pearl necklace, and each little ball is strung together. So if you had a 20 beaded necklace together, that would be a longer chain to medium chains fat.
Okay.
And so then if you cut the string and put it into like one until, well, actually like 2 or 3 up until about 8 or 9, that would be a short chain fat. And then if you go longer, it's a long chain fat. So it's the same, any fat has a different length, and each little molecule is a fatty acid. Okay. And so the body saturated fat just is more firm, and it's or more rigid, and it doesn't have a bend in it.
Okay.
And so when you say mono unsaturated fat, it just means mono is one. It has one bend in the pearl necklace, and so it can bend around itself more easily. And then that means it's more liquidy. It has more pliability.
Okay, that makes
and then if you
sense.
say polyunsaturated fat, means poly or more than one bend. They call it a double bond in science. So that means you could wrap that around that pearl necklace could be like wrapped into a ball, real pliability, not so rigid. Okay. And so your body actually requires all types of fats.
Okay.
And one's not better than the other. And
so it's about balance.
It's about balance. And actually in all foods, contrary to popular belief, like olive oil, for example, they say that is a mono unsaturated fat. It's healthy. But in fact, it's got a mixture of saturates and polyunsaturates. It just predominates out of one. So we kind of just put a statement saying, well, this fat is this type. All fats actually are a blend. They just predominate, and your body needs them. So you can't make good pie crust, pie, out of polyunsaturated oil. You can't whip canola oil long enough to make a pie crust. You need a saturated monounsaturated oil, so like palm oil, duck fat, lard, all of those, butter. They have more rigidity and some fluidity.
Okay.
So we've kind of gone out of whack, So when you look at a lot of the fats, it's because the body requires more, and the closer to nature they are, then obviously the better, not processed.
That makes sense.
And that's really the secret.
Yeah. Yeah. So the more real. Okay, that totally makes sense to me. All right, so we're coming to the end. We're running out of time, and I think we got one last question. So we'll do one last question, and then sort of in the back of your head, think, what's your final word that you want to give people? So the last question is, I'm having problems with eczema, and a friend told me it might be food related. Where should I start?
That's for me.
We'll both do it.
Yeah. Okay. From my standpoint, the eczema commonly comes from what we discussed about the leaky gut and the immune dysfunction.
Oh, cool.
So and that could be related to some food intolerances, the yeast overgrowth, which you talked about, the candidiasis, that could be involved. And commonly, dairy is a big one in eczema. It's just the way we process dairy, etc., is an issue. So the inexpensive fix would be to take one food such as dairy completely out of the diet for at least 3 weeks to a month, and then you could see if it resolved. And that, it costs you time, and it might be a bit of a pain in the butt, yet it would be something that you could do. If you look at it, it could be the gluten or in the wheat. A lot of people, those are the two top offenders.
Yeah.
Soy's an offender. Those are some of the ones, but they're always, with eczema, there will always be a digestive dysfunction too. Maybe even just adding some good quality probiotics helps to clean up the gut, which is where 90% of your immune system is, and then your skin actually calms down too.
Cool. So from an energy perspective, skin is your largest organ, and it correlates with the weave chakra, which is all about connection. Okay. And so it's typically, if you're struggling with healthy boundaries, if you're struggling with intimacy, if you're struggling, and intimacy could be emotional intimacy, if you're struggling with saying no to people, all of those things are going to aggravate your skin. If you're taking on things, a little bit of taking responsibility where it's not your responsibility, all of that stuff is going to aggravate the skin. If it gets to the point of eczema, you're having serious pain from the situation. So seriously feeling that you want to change things where you don't have control of the outcome. You want to fix somebody's life that isn't your life, you want closeness and you're not getting it, or you have someone who's trying to be close to you and you don't want it, that kind of thing. Always back to boundaries. It's always going to come back to boundaries. That makes sense, because if you think about kind of the logical mapping, if you're having a struggle with the immune system, it makes sense that would map to a struggle with boundaries.
Right.
So we're at the end of the night. What is your final word? What would you like people to take away?
Well, I think appreciate your body. It has amazing feedback mechanisms. Integrate your body with your environment and nature, and realize it's amazing, and just paying attention to it oftentimes, and being able to step back and perhaps taking the ego out a little bit, which is very difficult for all of us, and just try a few things, and oftentimes your body will respond miraculously using some of that good quality advice from both the emotional, spiritual side, as well as looking at some of the nutritional things and being open to possibilities.
Yeah. So my final word is, I think that in the same way we want balance in general, people who are inclined to do emotional healing often forget there's a physical element, and people who are inclined to do physical healing often forget there's an emotional element. And I really think you always have to address both. And so if you
It's great.
become aware of that, it can really help. It can really help make something change to make you feel better on a day-to-day basis. So that's the Holistic Missile Show for May. And I had a good time. I hope you had a good time. I think
great time.
Yeah, and people were having a good time asking questions, so that always feels good. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.